Washington is now describing its new measures as the toughest sanctions in history. What exactly is the Trump administration trying to achieve through this economic pressure campaign? And is the objective to change Iran's behavior or ultimately to force a change in the Iranian political system?
There's a lot of confusion coming out of Washington because they also just imposed the toughest sanctions in history against Cuba. So I don't know, is there a competition of some kind here? You know, the obvious intent of these things is to create unrest among the people of these countries in the hope that they'll overthrow their government. And there are very, well-placed, willing accomplices in each case, as it has been in every color revolution, so-called, that when people start to protest, they try to divert the protests into something that drives the government from power, and they have, a little junta all prepared to take over. So Iran has thrown an awful lot of surprises at these characters. Cuba has withstood this kind of treatment since 1960. Okay, that's 66 years now, and Iran since 1979, at least. Okay, the Iranian people since the beginning of the last century, and certainly since 1953. So if they're doubling down on failed policies, I can't see it as anything else other than being completely frustrated and having a hissy fit.
And Don, Iranian officials on the other side are describing the new American sanctions as a sign of desperation and a repetition of failed policies. Why do you think Tehran believes Washington is repeating a strategy that has already failed to achieve its main political objectives?
Well, because it happens to be true. There have been these sanctions that have been piled on since the Carter administration. They were increased by Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, the JCPOA notwithstanding, because that didn't really touch any of the real sanctions, and then Trump and Biden, by the way, never did anything for it either. So, and it has continuously failed. There has been unrest in Iran like there's been unrest in just about every country. People don't think that they're governments or gods or anything, then they're human beings and they express their positions, their feelings about things from time to time. But the Iranian people already know the history of their relationship with the Western world, particularly the United States and the British. And so they're not easily fooled, and they have a long history, a long view of history about how these things play out, and they have confidence in their government, obviously.
Right. Don, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has argued that repeating sanction is not going to produce any results, and he instead called for dialogue based on mutual respect. Does this new pressure campaign actually strengthen the argument inside Iran that negotiations with Washington are pointless?
Just a slight detour into history. There was a revolution in Russia in 1917 that established what became the Soviet government by the early 1920s. And it took the United States 16 years to recognize that government, 16 years. There was a revolution in China in 1949, and it took the United States until 1979 to recognize that government, 30 years, okay? Then John Bolton was appointed some Deputy Secretary of State or some official position and appointed Juan Guaido president of Venezuela. I don't think he can still walk into a pizza place without having get slapped around or whatever. So the view from wherever they're watching all these international affairs is to say it's skewed is insufficient. The same policies that they have declared over and over. I mean, I remember what was his name, Burton Helms, the bill that was supposed to choke Cuba to death 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and Helms-Burton, and still Cuba is surviving. Iran was supposed to be choked out. They bombed infrastructure via Israel over decades, and the Iranian Revolution is stronger than ever, really. And the United States is finding itself that all of the assets that they thought they had and all of the guns that they thought they had pointed at Iran turned out to be pointed at them. It's like a judo move, beating up the bully on the block, and the whole world is seeing this and remembering Vietnam and other incidents like that in our history.
And Don, Mr. Besant said that this campaign is going to bring in his words, the Iranian regime down. But the previous maximum pressure campaign severely reduced Iran's revenues, especially from oil and everything, but failed to bring the system down. Why do you think the Americans believe that this time would be any different?
Well, if he's the brains of the operation with respect to economic analysis, you can understand that. Some of the pronouncements he's made about the American economy that he can see from, outside his window in his Washington office are absurd. I mean, just patently absurd. The statistics contraindicate everything that he said in terms of growth, in terms of productivity, in terms of job creation, in terms of distribution of wealth, all of this. And by the way, this government's fiscal policy is also as bad as the last 15 of them. The U.S. is in more debt than anyone has ever been in the history of the world, actually. The U.S. government is in deeper debt than any other entity in the history of the world. And that gets worse every year. The record is only being broken every year by the U.S. government. There comes a time when printing paper won't buy anything because none of the machinery has been sustained, because you don't pay the people enough to buy anything, and you ship everything offshore and recreate that other places, and then start shooting at those places, and they cut you off. It's an insane economic, military, imperial. The whole policy is riddled with contradictions, and it's coming unraveled now in front of our eyes.
China seems to be the key player here as like one of the major buyers of Iranian oil, and if Washington threatens secondary sanctions against countries continuing to trade with Iran, could this sanction campaign turn into a much broader confrontation actually between the United States and China?
Well, I think the wise people in the world right now are hedging their bets and cashing in some of their dollar reserves for yuan or renminbi, whichever currency they can convert to. The manufacturing, architecture, almost every bone in the body of the global economy has a much deeper root and broader foothold in China than it does in the United States and Europe combined. And so the power of the elite that controls the U.S., Europe, Japan, South, occupied Korea, and Australia, that power is in real terms diminishing rapidly against the combined or the aggregate power of everyone else on the planet. And the actions of the U.S. government in particular are in essence driving everyone outside of that imperial design together in the same way that they drove Russia and China together in 2014 when they tried to sanction Russia out of existence and provoke some sort of regime change in Russia after they took over Ukraine. They tried to boycott they boycotted all the petroleum products. China stepped in and said, no problem, we'll buy it. And they signed the largest business deal at that point in the history of the world that gave China access to Russia's petroleum and natural gas. So this dynamic is playing out across the global economy right now. They're forcing people to be self-sufficient, as Iran has had to become, as Russia had to become, as China had to become, as a whole lot of other spots on the planet have had to become, and they're all reaching out to each other to develop an economy that is outside of the control of these maniacs who have been trying to take over the world since at least the end of World War II.